Hey there, I'm Tom Chi, and I'm going to be talking about a way that humanity can take a very different relationship to the planet. So let's begin. So if we go back to the beginning of agriculture, the human population has increased by a factor of 1,000, starting at about 7 million at that point to over 7.4 billion today. And I think that when people hear these figures, one of the immediate thoughts is, well, maybe this is the cause of all the destruction of the planet. Maybe there's just simply too many human beings on Earth. And given that the population is going to continue to increase to 9 or 10 billion by many estimates, then there's just simply no hope. But let's look at this in a little bit more detail. If we were to actually take all of the biomass of humanity, so if you were to grab all the people on Earth and put them together, we would weigh about 350 million tons. And it actually turns out that biologists estimate that if we were to take all the ants on Earth and put them together, they would weigh just about the same, 350 million tons. But a difference between human beings and ants is that human beings eat 2.8 to 3% of their body weight per day, while ants actually eat 30% of their body weight per day. And what this means in practice is that in any given day, ants actually eat 10 times more of the Earth than human beings do. Ultimately, it's not about the absolute amount that human beings are currently consuming, because as you can see here, ants literally eat 10 times more than us. It's actually the way that we're doing it. As we go through the process of eating 1/10 of what ants eat, we've cleared huge portions of the surface of the Earth. We've created tremendous damage. While in the process of eating 10 times more than us, ants have actually enriched the world. They aerate the soils, they recycle nutrients, they provide a vast collection of ecosystem services. In fact, ants provide more ecosystem services than ecosystem consumption. And this is not only true of ants, it actually turns out to be true of basically all species, that their presence in the biosphere produces more ecosystem services than they consume. And this is actually what has made it possible for so many species to develop on Earth and make their home across so many ecosystems. The main organism that is not following this rule is us. And so we can look at this goal actually. What would it take for us to create the sort of civilization where we as a species create more ecosystem services than ecosystem consumption? In other words, how can humanity become a net positive to nature? So in order to assess how viable it is for us to become a net positive to nature, we need to look at where we're starting from. And this is a collection of graphs that talk about some of the impacts that we've done from fossil fuels, which are one of a number of ways that we've been impacting nature over the past couple hundred years. This graph in particular gives us a bird's eye view of the way that we have changed the climate since before the Industrial Revolution. So over on the left-hand side, we see the concentration of carbon dioxide in the air before the year 1750. Since that time, we've burned enough coal to release over 748 gigatons of carbon dioxide, so 748 billion tons, adding about 96 parts per million into the environment. If you then add in oil, gas, cement, the contribution of land use, which is basically changes to how we're using the land on Earth, including clearing 40% of all the land surface of the Earth to feed ourselves, then you get the aggregate contribution of these activities, which would actually put us at close to 570 parts per million in the atmosphere as of September of 2018. But luckily, that's not the only thing that happened during this time period. While human beings were doing all these activities, the ecosystem actually responded. Specifically, the oceans absorbed over 580 gigatons of carbon dioxide. The land absorbed close to 650 gigatons. And the remainder of it has stayed up in the air, increasing global concentration of carbon dioxide from 280 up to about 409 today. If we're to summarize this impact, it means that about 2,200 gigatons have been added since the Industrial Revolution, and actually more than half of that has been absorbed by the ocean and the land, and the remainder, about 1 trillion tons, has remained in the air, creating climate destabilization. Now, when we look at what's happened with the oceans, all those gigatons have started to have an impact. We've reduced the pH of the ocean by about 0.11, which means it's 30% more acidic than it was before the Industrial Revolution. And the land actually holds the clues for some ways that we might be able to go change the dynamic here, because the carbon that has been absorbed by the land has mostly gone into plants, soils, and wetlands, things that actually can be quite beneficial to the health of the ecosystem, depending on how they're grown. So if this is the picture of how much we've impacted the environment to date, and some clues as to how we might begin restoring it, how much time do we have to work with? Well, a number of the impacts have been catching up with us pretty quickly. For example, over the last 3 to 4 years, we've wiped out close to 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef, and we are actually on track to extinct all of global reefs within about 35 years. This would immediately extinct about 25% of all marine species and significantly impact a good deal more that rely on coral reefs for their food chain or for their reproduction chain. And it'll also directly affect about 1 billion people that make their livelihoods or get their protein from the coral reef ecosystems.